facts are stubborn things. I'll be right back. Gracious Gang, it's Mike from thegraciousguest.org. This is The Gracious Guest Show, and I am coming to you from the home studio here. So if you're watching the video, this is going to be a more regular feature. If you're listening to the podcast, welcome to a familiar format. A couple quick little programming notes before we get down to business. Make sure you go to thegraciousguest.org and do it regularly. I've got content on there. I'm a little more regular with the content now, video, the audio portions of them, and also some blog posts I'm going to be rolling out here pretty soon. I'm trying to work on a couple projects at once, which as always is a bit of a challenge, but I'm up to the task, I think. So I just finished interviewing my daughter yet again. Noelle, our field correspondent, was in the studio. She came on to talk about horseback riding, and so make sure you check that little short video out too. It's funny because right at the end of it, she actually clicked stop because she was fiddling around with the recording on the computer. just stopped it in the middle of it. So I was like, okay. So that was kind of funny. Anyway, graciousguest.org, the YouTube channel, you can subscribe. Please do. Please share as well. I had a couple students messing with me the other day as we shot all the way up to 215 subscribers. And then they dropped me down to 200. And then to 199. And back to 200. So if you out there, fans who are not high school students, especially, could maybe subscribe just to get me over that 200 point. Let's go crazy. Let's get it all the way up to 300. And not have it being at the whim of my lovable but sometimes silly high school student fans. And if you're watching this, I love you guys. You're great. So thank you for subscribing. At any rate, this is something I was going over this week with the guys in class, and I wanted to come here and talk about it with you all. And so let me just sort of apologize in advance for anybody who is listening and not watching this. You're not going to be able to see some of the stuff I'm going to put up, but I'll describe some of these graphics and everything. And I'll link all this in the show notes as well, also on the YouTube channel, so everyone will be able to see where this is coming from at any rate. But I wanted to talk about the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin is just to catch you up here, it's a 14 foot 3 inch by 3 foot 7 inch linen burial cloth that is kept in Turin or Torino, Italy. And it's been there since, it's been there for, at least about 700 years, give or take. And it has long been venerated as the burial cloth of Jesus. It's believed to be this most holy relic, and you see on the shroud this depiction, and for those watching, I'm going to put it up here, this depiction of a man with his, it's a full-length body shot of a man, or outline of a man, who is naked, and his hands are crossed in front of him. His right hand is over his left, and his legs are together and sort of straight. And then so that you see the whole frontal body image, and you see on the other end of the cloth the whole back image, the whole back side of him, his head, his shoulders, back, all the way down to his legs and feet on the back. Covered with wounds, terrible cuts all over him, gouges that look like... what's the word I'm looking for? Like scourging marks all over him, consistent with a Roman crucifixion. Very brutal. Also nail wounds, in his wrists, nail wounds on his feet, crown of thorns, So just from the image itself, which is very faint, but you can see with the naked eye this image of this man, this mysterious image, and it was long venerated as the image of Christ. But it was supposedly debunked in the 1980s with a carbon-14 dating, a radiocarbon test that was this big scandalous thing and made news, that, oh my gosh, it turns out that the Shroud of Turin is a medieval forgery. It is a fake. It's not real. It does not go back to the time of Jesus. These were the claims that were made. Well, long story short, and like I said, a lot of the links I'm going to include, you can go research this in more depth, but basically the carbon-14 dating is suspect, to say the least. Now, I flat out believe from what I've seen that it's just obviously problematic and just false, okay? And there's a couple reasons they think that, or that have been suggested as to why the dating might be off. First of all, basically people who deeply continue to believe that this is indeed the burial cloth of Jesus didn't let it go. Okay, and they were persistent, they stuck with it, and furthermore, scientists who didn't necessarily have any skin in the game as far as the faith aspect of this, but like looking at the data, started to notice some suspicious things that made them want to test it. Now, to date, they haven't been able to get access to re-carbon date the shroud, and part of that's just because, again, this is a very venerated relic, no matter what you say about it, and so it's very difficult to get access to it, to, get a piece that you have to destroy, basically, in a carbon dating. So to be fair, you want to protect the integrity of it and that kind of thing. But there could be some suspicious things going on too, some nefarious things going on, because the portion of the Shroud of Turin that they dated did not meet any of the protocols they were supposed to follow, which included taking portions from, I think, samples from 7 different portions of the cloth so that you'd get a good sample. Well, at the last minute, they only took samples from this one corner, which is a very problematic portion of the cloth, because the cloth's been through a lot over the years, and people touching it, people venerating it, and coming up and touching it with their hands before it was finally encased in a hermetically sealed, like, bulletproof container that's highly guarded and everything. It used to just be brought out every now and then, and throngs of people would come up and touch it and contaminate it. But also, there was a fire in, I believe, the 15th century, 14th or 15th century, where portions of the cloth were burned. And thank God it was able to be saved, but they patched it later. And the sisters, I think it was in a convent at one point, part of the shroud that they patched is the part, and the only part, that the sample for the radiocarbon dating came from. So right off the bat, that's a no-go, right? The dating is wrong. Now, I can't prove to you just from that it is Jesus' burial cloth. There's other things you have to look at, of course. But the point being that if all you've heard before about the Shroud of Turin is that people thought it was Jesus' burial cloth, but in the 1980s scientists proved it was a medieval forgery, your data is out of date. Your information is out of date, and I'm excited to tell you there is way more going on with the Shroud of Turin than you probably realize. Another fun fact is, since that carbon dating was done in the 80s, there's been at least 4 other major scientific datings done on the shroud using all kinds of different methods. Because there's other ways you can date stuff. They've done tensile tests, like on the fibers themselves, like basically textile tests. People who are experts on cloth, that can basically make some predictions on the aging. They've done other kinds of, I think, thermochemical tests. They've done tests with all sorts of different spectroscopy and imagery and all that kind of stuff. There's, and I think even an argon test rather than carbon. So there's been all these other tests done. All of them come back and say that this linen is from the time of Christ, plus or minus 150 years, which is a pretty standard kind of margin of error. But anyway you look at it, it's not a medieval forgery. It's just not. Plus, there's a lot of really crazy things about the cloth itself and the image on it that really make the whole medieval forgery thing nonsense. So anyways, let me walk you through some of this. And all I want to do is just share with you some of my favorite things. There's way more, but I just want to share with you some of my favorite characteristics in 3 categories. Basically, the cloth itself, right? So the actual linen, the blood on the cloth, the blood stains, blood patterns, which reveals a lot of interesting information. And then thirdly, the image itself. The image does not come from the blood. It's not a blood stain that's producing that image. There's blood stains on the cloth that correspond to the image, but the image of the man on the shroud is not a stain of any kind. That's totally different, and that's the thing I'm going to culminate with here, because I think that's the coolest stuff. So before I get to that, I just want to give you a real quick, again, summary of the history of the shroud and its journey, because now just for the purpose of this, just sort of assume for a second that it is indeed the burial cloth of Jesus, okay? What we know we've basically been able to piece together from all sorts of other clues that have emerged, and other things I'll get to a little bit later about the cloth in particular, is that apparently after the resurrection, and especially because you know the importance of this cloth, and you can see Jesus' image on it. The apostles protected this thing. People, kept it. It was this treasured heirloom. They passed it down through centuries. As trouble began to mount and persecution mounted for the church, it went on this journey to protect it, and it was taken to Edessa, Turkey, modern-day Turkey, part of the Roman Empire at the time, north of Jerusalem, a little bit northeast. It was this big commerce center. It was a Christians, big pocket of Christians in the early church, and it was venerated there. And we have records of a shroud-like image that matches the characteristics of the Shroud of Turin being venerated and kept in a very under lock and key and brought out for particular feasts and stuff as early as about 270 A.D. It's there for centuries, at which time around maybe the 800s, I don't have the date in front of me here, but several centuries later, the emperor in Constantinople finds out about it, and he wants it to be in the capital. So they bring it to Constantinople. There it's displayed in this very intricate pulley kind of box that they basically raise it up in this very dramatic Eastern liturgical sort of way. If you guys, any Greek Orthodox fans listening to the show, you know what I'm talking about. It's spectacle, right? Which is awesome. Eastern liturgies really have that panache and spectacle about them. So this really awesome way of raising this up to see the image, kind of backlit. And that's when we catch up in the Middle Ages with a French crusader who witnesses this when he's in Constantinople. And this real quick disclaimer here, then around the time that the Fourth Crusade happens in 1204, where greedy French crusaders, who are warned ahead of time by the Pope that they will all be excommunicated if they do what the rumors say they're about to do, which is to go into Constantinople, a Christian city, and utterly ransack it and take all the treasures home. But they don't listen to the Pope. They do that anyway. And the shroud in Constantinople disappears. Well, then about 200 years later, all of a sudden, it shows up, not 200, a little less than 200 years later, the Shroud of Turin, the one we actually have that we're talking about here, shows up in Liry, France, with this family with crusader lineage. So again, there's some gaps here and there, but it's a very plausible, story if you track all this and you connect all these dots together. Eventually, that family entrusts the shroud to the Savoy family in Turin, and that's how it goes to Turin. That's where it's at to this day. They keep it, like I said, in a hermetically sealed case in this low-lit room and all this kind of stuff. It's got a tremendous amount of modern technology now helping to protect the shroud because of its importance. So, moving along here, I want to get to the really interesting stuff. And first of all, when you look at the image on the shroud, and you do a photo negative on it, and I'm going to get to that later, why that's significant, and you see much more detail. Remarkable detail in the man's image. And again, for those of you watching, I'm going to put it up here for you to see. And you see all these white little marks, these little scratch, they look like scratch marks or cuts, all up and down his body, front and back. It's like Isaiah chapter 52 and chapter 53 talking about this prophecy of how the Messiah will suffer terribly. By his stripes we are healed. I mean, those are the stripes. All right? To reflect on how much Jesus loves us and the terrible torment he undergoes to save us from our sins. And that's one of the most amazing things for me about the shroud, is to meditate on his love for all of us. At the end here, I'll show you, and again, I'll put a link in the show notes, to some of this stuff, the face image that I actually have right over my desk to meditate on when I'm sort of praying toward the wall, this direction. Again, for those of you watching, sort of the other direction that I'm filming right now is my prayer wall, and right front and center I have this face image, life-size face image of Jesus from the shroud. So anyway, that's the first thing I want to show you there, is just to really reflect, I think, through all this, the main takeaway, and I tried to communicate with my students this week, is just to really meditate on how much Jesus loves us so eternally. Now, moving along here. So just a couple things I want to share with you. So I have Shroud Facts Part 1, 2, and 3. Part 1's the cloth itself. Part 2 is the blood, as I mentioned. And then Part 3, the image. So this is some interesting stuff. First of all, the pollen grains. In pollen, it has its own history. There's fossilized pollen grains all over the shroud, and when they study it, they discover that a very large percentage of those pollens are indigenous and to Jerusalem. They're found in Jerusalem specifically, in northern Judea, and only there. Right, so it's not like it's pollen that, well, yeah, sure, there's some of that pollen in Jerusalem, but that doesn't prove anything because that pollen also exists in France. No, it doesn't. There's pollens all over the shroud that are indigenous only to Jerusalem. And interestingly enough, many of them that we can detect on the body originally itself, clinging to the body, just pollens that clung to him when he was outside, are pollens that show up right around Passover, right outside Jerusalem or in the Jerusalem area. So even that, it lends a little credibility to the timing of all of this. So that's cool. Also, this one's mind-blowing. Roman leptons, these two coins. It was not uncommon for Jews at the time to put coins on the eyes when you're burying the body, help keep the eyelids closed. But through all sorts of, hypersensitive scientific analysis just in the last few years, they can actually now detect in the image, they can detect these two specific Roman coins that you can see. Again, not with the naked eye. Only under these very scientific tests that they run. You can see these two Roman coins on the eyes, but not just any Roman coins. They are specific Roman leptons that were minted by Pontius Pilate in a special minting in 29 AD in Jerusalem. I mean, come on. Game, set, match right there for me. But there's more. So that's just cool. And there's no doubt about that. They absolutely can tell what coins they are. So you want to tell me some Middle Ages, medieval forger or hoaxer was like, I got to make sure I get these, Pontius Pilate Roman coins that were minted in 29 AD that no one right now is even aware of, but they'll find out about through archaeology in a few hundred years and then know it. Come on. So that's another cool one. This is really interesting too. The cloth, right? It matches another relic called the Sudarium Christi. It's the Sudarium of Oviedo. It's in Oviedo, Spain. It's long been believed to be the face cloth that was wrapped around Jesus' face when they first took him down from the cross, but that then was removed when the burial shroud was put on him a few moments later. And then the face cloth was set to the side. You hear about it in the Gospel of John, when Peter and John run in the tomb, which is this picture right behind me, actually, on the wall in the office. Peter and John running to the tomb Easter morning because they've heard that Jesus is risen and they want to see for themselves. And they go in the tomb and it says they saw and believed. What did they see? They saw the shroud with his image on it. That's my take on it. Because if this is the burial cloth of Jesus, it means when they went into the tomb and they saw this cloth laying there, they saw his image on it, burned into it. Okay, that's so cool. But the image is not on the Sudarium, because he didn't resurrect through the Sudarium, the face cloth, that was laying off to the side. But it did go on his head before he was buried, and so did the shroud when it was taken off. So, in other words, the blood patterns match, the wound markings match on both cloths. And the reason this is significant especially is because we know for a fact the Sudarium Christi has been in Oviedo, Spain since at least 616 AD. There are over 124 exact matches between these two cloths just on the head, right? Because the Sudarium only covered the head. So first of all, think of that. There's over 124 wounds on our Lord's head through the crucifixion. I mean, the crown of thorns and the cap. These thorns are like 2 or 3, 3 or 4 sometimes even inches long. Massive thorns. Horrible treatment that he goes through. Terrible, brutal crucifixion. And in fact, remember, Jesus dies way earlier than most crucifixion victims do. They treat him so horribly. Pilate is surprised when they go and want to get the body, and he says, he's dead already? He's kind of surprised. Long story short, though, not only do the wounds match between the Sudarium, which again has been in Spain since at least 616 AD, and we know where it was before that, going back to Jerusalem at least 200 years before that. Again, the Shroud of Turin cannot possibly be a medieval hoax. They were absolutely on the same body. Okay? There's no doubt about that anymore. I think in court, I've heard in certain homicide cases, you can convict someone if you can have 2 cloths and you can do 10 matches on them. You're trying to match up potential, evidence in a murder case. If you get I think it's 8 or 10 matches, you can convict the person. Well, there's 124 matches, exact matches. And not just the blood, but also between the shroud and the Sudarium, the blood matches, the blood patterns, like the blood flow, the wounds, that all matches. Saliva, spittle at the corner of his mouth, the spit that had come out of his mouth onto the Sudarium, and then also onto the shroud a few moments later. They can match those up. And also the pleural edema fluid. And this pleural edema fluid, which the sac around our lungs, which has fluid in it, and it's a protective measure to basically keep our lungs from rubbing against the inside of our chest cavity. It keeps friction down. Well, under severe trauma, that can fill up with excess fluid. And if you remember in the Gospels, what do? To make sure he's dead, well, to check that he's dead, but if he's not, he's going to be dead now. They shove this Roman lance up between his rib cage into the lung, punctures the lung, pull the lance out, and it says in the Gospels that what came out? Blood and water. Right? There's a lot of theological imagery with that too, but literally, blood's pouring out of Jesus' side from the cross, along with this pleural edema fluid from the punctured lung that had filled up through this trauma. You see that fluid under scientific analysis, forensic analysis. They bring in homicide, like forensic teams, like CSI type stuff to do a lot of this, which is so awesome. So you can see that matches, because it also comes out the nose a little bit. And so they can see on the Sudarium some of that fluid that also matches the shroud. So, the blood between the Sudarium and the Shroud of Turin matches. It's type AB positive. It's a relatively rare type of blood, but it also matches other confirmed miraculous appearances of Jesus' blood elsewhere in the world across history. It turns up AB positive. They can also detect blood plasma around the blood stains. So again, the shroud, there's stains. You can see blood stains on the shroud. It's a little more reddish than brown, which means it has a high bilirubin content, which is consistent with bodily response to extreme trauma. In other words, the man on the shroud, whoever he is, had absolutely, without a doubt, just died a very traumatic crucifixion death. And the way the blood shows up, when they analyze the blood samples, with very old blood samples, and you can't get a perfect DNA match from it, but you can get a partial profile. You can detect all this stuff in this analysis. So that's really interesting as well. The bottom line is, all of the wounds depicted on the shroud that you can see match perfectly with the gospel accounts, details from the Gospels about how the crucifixion went, along with what we've learned relatively recently, in sort of historical and archaeological research that has filled in the picture a little bit more for us. One great example of this is crucifixion. Very often you weren't actually nailed to the cross, you'd be tied up, again, because they wanted it to last a really long time. So the fact that this man has not just nail wounds, but they're not through the palm of his hand, they're actually through the wrist, because the structure on the wrist is more capable of suitably withstanding the pressure and holding a body up. Otherwise, it would potentially rip out. So that matches on the body, meaning he actually was crucified the way that we know they crucified people, at least in certain circumstances. And also the feet. You didn't actually put them like bottom of foot over top of foot flat on the cross and nail straight through the front of the foot like we normally see in artwork, which is exactly what a medieval hoaxer would have done, because that's what all the art of the time depicted, since crucifixion wasn't done anymore the old way, and they kind of didn't remember or didn't have any records at that time of how it had been done. So now we know, because we found examples of crucifixion victims, and stuff like that. We have a better idea where they would actually kind of cant the legs to the side and hammer the nail through the ankles straight into the cross. And that is exactly how the foot nail wounds are on the man on the Shroud of Turin. It's sideways through his ankles and into the cross. That's exactly how it was done. So all these little details and things, again, a lot of this that you can't even detect until they put it under very hypersensitive photographic, analysis and 3D analysis and stuff like UV and all this stuff that didn't exist till recently. But all of that data is in the image and in the shroud, waiting for us to unpack it. So last but not least, and this is maybe the biggie, the image itself. Here's the crazy thing. When you look at the image, and I'm going to put it up again here for people watching. When you look at the image, first it's, you see, first of all, this is what it, the actual way you see the image when you see it in person. What's weird is that is an actual photographic negative. When you do a photographic negative on that, what you're seeing is what he really looks like. So the image itself, again, is a perfect, precise, three-dimensional photographic negative, and linen is a non-photographically sensitive cloth. And I've told my students this, and by the way, this next thing I want to mention, we know tons of research and studies and stuff, like in the labs, they've tried to figure out, they know it is not paint, the image of the man on the shroud. It's not paint. It's not a dye. It's no liquid. It's not a chemical, a vapor. It's not a heat transference thing where they did a bas-relief, and try to burn an image. It's not any of those things. Everything they've tried, they keep coming up with a dead end, because none of those things can create these features. What's interesting is the whole image only penetrates the cloth about the width of a human hair, right? And linen's not that thick to begin with. So this is what's so crazy, is when you look at that image of the man on the shroud, if you flip the shroud over, the image isn't on the back of it, because the whole image only resides at the topmost fibrils of the cloth the whole way across. Again, about the width of a human hair. If you tried to use you take a Sharpie, right, and just tap a Sharpie real quick, like on a linen cloth, it bleeds through, right? And not only does it bleed through to the other side, it also will blur and spread out right into the other surrounding fibrils. This image is like high definition, high resolution, very crisp, tight, right on the very top of the cloth, and doesn't penetrate at all. I mean, that's weird. That's absolutely bizarre. And so they start, they finally get to the point where they're eliminating possibilities, like Sherlock Holmes style. Like, okay, what could produce this image? Because it's there. It's not theoretical. I'm looking at the thing. That image exists on this cloth. All right, and it's at least 700 years old if the hoax belief is true, and it's not, so it's even older. It's 2,000 years old. How is this image on there? Well, my friends, they figured it out. And by the way, should I mention, they know too that the image, without a shadow of a doubt, the image was produced after the man died. And they can tell that from a lot of the blood flow patterns and stuff like that. They can tell this man, here's, blood, wounds and everything. He's dead. He's wrapped in this shroud. And then some of the blood stains go onto the shroud. He's laying there dead, and the corpses, like the blood patterns and everything show up. And after the blood transfers onto the cloth, after all those blood stains are there, then something happens in a moment, and then there's this image now there too. Okay? In 2010, an Italian team duplicated an image. Just a very small image. I don't even know what image they duplicated. I'm not sure if it was a face or whatever, but they were able to transfer onto cloth, linen cloth. They tried to match all of the conditions to make it very similar. They produced a very similar image it's on the very uppermost fibrils of the linen cloth, doesn't penetrate the cloth. Perfect three-dimensional photographic negative image. And the way they did it involved using an AMFR excimer laser. This is like hyper-sophisticated laser that they could basically use to simulate or to produce a burst of background ultraviolet radiation. So in other words, it's well, I was going to say nuclear. It's radiation. It's a radiologically produced image. That's the only way to explain it. But here's the thing. Couple things. First of all, how in God's name does a dead body produce a radiological burst of an image onto a cloth after it's dead? You tell me, okay? Secondly, they extrapolated from their laboratory, and this has been backed up multiple, and I'll post again, there's a 33-page report on this. You can go look up the actual original studies and stuff as well. Some of them are in Italian, whatever, but there's other labs subsequently since 2010 who have duplicated this in their laboratory experiments, verifying it. And what they all sort of agree upon is if you extrapolate this data, what you find is that to reproduce the actual Shroud of Turin image, the whole body, front and back, again, not in theory, but as we have it, because it's real and it's right there looking at you when you go see it in Turin. To produce that image would require 6 to 8 billion, with a B, 6 to 8 billion watts of light energy. of background ultraviolet radiation, 6 to 8 billion watts of light energy, exploding out in a three-dimensional burst from every square inch, every molecule of this man's body, every molecule, like every three-dimensional point in his entire body, exploding outward in every direction in 1/40 billionth of a second. Because if it's, so take 1 second, divide it by 40 billion, and one of those, okay? Like, that is a really short amount of time. Because if it's 2/40 billionths of a second, it vaporizes the entire linen and there's not a trace of it left. Because you're talking about the amount of light energy here that would be equivalent to being having 500,000 searchlights pointed directly into your face and turned on at the same time. That's how much light energy we're talking about. It's similar to the amount of light energy that you're experiencing about 10,000 miles from the surface of the sun. Right? Earth is 93 million miles from the sun. If you're 10,000 miles from the surface of the sun, that's how much light energy we're talking about here. I mean, come on. How? You know. And so, like I said, this is just some of my favorite stuff. There's other things as well. Oh, here's one more. I heard recently, I haven't had a chance to double check this, but I heard that they've found various food particles here and there on the Shroud of Turin that are consistent with some of the ingredients at a Jewish Passover Seder. Why in the world would there be food particles in the Shroud of Turin? Well, there's an ancient tradition that the Shroud of Turin is the tablecloth from the Last Supper. Which would make a lot of sense, right? I mean, they didn't expect Jesus to die. He told them that he was going to die. They didn't listen. They didn't get it. And he dies in this very sudden circumstance, this terrible, terrible crucifixion. They have to get him entombed very quickly. They can't follow the normal cleaning procedures and everything because it's the Sabbath or the Passover's coming up. They got to get him wrapped up quick. Someone runs back to the upper room and grabs the tablecloth, runs back, they wrap him up in that. I mean, it's very plausible, right? The site of the Last Supper is not very far away at all. I don't have it in front of me, but I mean, I've been there. It's, I don't know, a mile away, if that. Somebody run back quick, get the tablecloth, that'll do, and you bring it back and you lay him in that and you wrap him in it. So anyway, there's so many things, you guys. I mean, and the more I study it, the more I'm just completely, profoundly blown away. My love for our Lord, my just heart breaks to think of all that he went through, because the most important thing, I think, is not all these cool factoids, the reality that the Shroud of Turin is not just a relic of the crucifixion, but also a relic of the resurrection. In other words, the moment of the resurrection in a snapshot, which I think God, he could have done the resurrection any way he wanted, but I think he did it this way so that 2,000 years later, us, scientifically minded, super smart people who usually have no faith whatsoever would be just blown away by our discovery of all of these things that have been right there the whole time, waiting to be discovered. There are dozens of people, at least dozens and dozens of people, scientists, who have come to an active Christian faith because of working with the Shroud of Turin. They get to a point where the only conclusion they can rationally make is that this is real. Man, if this is real, what else is real? I mean, if the resurrection's real, I mean, is the other stuff Jesus said real too? I mean, it's amazing what this shroud is doing in this era. And a lot of people still think it's a hoax. A lot of people don't know all these details. That's why I want to share it with you guys here today and just hopefully blow your minds a little bit as we approach Easter. So I'm releasing this on Sunday, the 28th of March, Passover. It's Passover to our Jewish brothers and sisters. God bless you. We love you very, very much. It's a very big, important time of year. And then for Christians, Easter's coming up next week. So, take this to prayer. Consider this. Look at the data. If you're skeptical about it for any reason, go look into it. I mean, there's so much stuff coming out about this. It's fascinating, and it's an incredible source of contemplation and meditation. And so I wanted to share this with you guys today. I hope you got something out of this. Thank you so much for tuning into the Gracious Guest Show. I love doing all sorts of random stuff on here, and this was just something I wanted to share this time of year with you all. So again, please make sure you visit thegraciousguest.org. Drop me some feedback on Facebook, No, I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook anymore. Forget Facebook. On YouTube, I had to consolidate a little. But again, everything on my website, you can get in touch with me directly through the website, the contact form on there. Let me know what you think of the show. Let me know if there's other topics you'd like me to investigate. I'm going to be doing some Bible study type stuff, some presentations, fun stuff as well, like my interview with Noel, random videos of me waiting for a ride that's late at work. I just try to have some fun with everything. Living with wonder and awe is the slogan of The Gracious Guest, which is a reference to Ephesians 3:17, that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. I want Jesus to be, he is a gracious guest in my own heart and my own soul. I want to be a gracious guest in his creation as I work my way through this life, paying attention for everywhere I can to wonder and awe all around us. And so that's what I do around here. Hope you guys appreciate this. Make sure to check out more of my work. Get in touch. Until next time, don't forget to wonder. God bless you.